Ms. Carter, they're ready for you. Naomi Carter stood outside the boardroom of Hunt Dynamics, her hand resting on a leather portfolio that contained 5 years of quiet planning, 3 years of strategic acquisitions, and one truth that would detonate the life of the man waiting inside. The man who had once been her husband. The man who had no idea that the venture group offering to save his failing company was a carefully constructed illusion, and that she was the reality waiting on the other side of that door. There's a particular kind of justice that doesn't announce itself with shouting or spectacle. It doesn't need to. It simply walks into a room, sits down, and waits for recognition to do the devastating work. Some people call it karma. Others call it consequence. Naomi had learned to call it something else entirely: architectural grace. The kind that builds while others destroy, that plans while others panic, that transforms betrayal into a blueprint so precise that when the foundation finally shifts, there's no earthquake, just a quiet, irreversible transfer of everything that once seemed permanent. Her name is Naomi Carter now, though for 5 years she'd been Naomi Hunt, back when she still believed that loving someone completely meant they would eventually love you back with the same intensity. Back when she thought marriage was partnership, not performance. Back when she didn't understand that to some people, devotion looks like weakness, and selflessness reads as permission to take without asking. This is the story of how a woman went from begging for scraps of affection in a marriage that starved her, to sitting at the head of a conference table while the man who discarded her realized, too late, that he'd thrown away the only person who ever truly saw him. And more than that, he'd gambled away his empire to save it, never knowing the savior and the reckoning were the same person. But before we get to that boardroom, before we watch the color drain from Justin Hunt's face when Naomi walks through that door, before the lawyers start sweating and the numbers start talking, we need to go back. Back to when Naomi still smiled with her whole face. Back to when she still believed that if she just tried harder, loved better, gave more, it would be enough. If you're settling in for this story, you're in the right place. This isn't just about revenge, though there's plenty of that. This isn't just about money, though $200 million makes an appearance. This is about what happens when the person everyone underestimated refuses to stay small. When grace becomes strategy. When silence becomes the sharpest weapon in the room. And if that sounds like something you need to hear right now, go ahead and subscribe. Hit that like button, because what's coming is the kind of story that'll make you rethink everything you thought you knew about strength, patience, and what it really means to win. Now, let me start from the beginning. 6 years ago, Naomi Carter was 26 years old and worked as a project coordinator for a mid-sized consulting firm in Charlotte. She wasn't wealthy. Her apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up with a radiator that clanged like it had a grudge, but she was content. She believed in working hard, treating people with kindness, and that good things came to those who stayed faithful to their values. She believed love was built, not found. That marriage was a garden you tended together, pulling weeds, planting seeds, watching something beautiful grow from shared effort. She believed, deeply and without question, that if you showed up for someone every single day, they would eventually see your worth. That belief is what made her fall for Justin Hunt. They met at a networking mixer she almost didn't attend. Justin was 29, confident in a way that didn't feel aggressive, funny in a way that made everyone around him feel included. He ran a small logistics startup called Hunt Dynamics, and when he talked about it, his eyes lit up with the kind of passion that made you want to believe in his vision too. He wasn't flashy, not yet, but there was something magnetic about his certainty, his refusal to apologize for wanting more. When he asked for her number, Naomi felt chosen. Their courtship was a whirlwind that felt like fate. Justin took her to food trucks and late-night diners, places where they could talk for hours without noticing the time. He told her about growing up with a father who never believed in him, about building something from nothing, about wanting to prove that he was more than people assumed. Naomi listened, and in listening, she found purpose. She started reviewing his pitch decks after work, color-coding his spreadsheets, connecting him with contacts from her firm who might open doors. When Hunt Dynamics landed its first major contract 6 months into their relationship, Justin credited Naomi in his celebratory email to the team. He called her his secret weapon, his good luck charm, his partner. 3 months later, he proposed. The wedding was small, Naomi's parents had passed when she was young, and she'd been raised by a grandmother who died during her junior year of college. Justin's family came, polite but distant, the kind of people who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. His mother made a comment about Naomi's dress being charming, in a tone that suggested charm was a consolation prize. His father shook her hand like he was sealing a business deal he hadn't fully read. But none of that mattered because Justin looked at her like she was the only person in the room. And when he said his vows, Naomi believed every word. The first year of marriage was good. Justin's company grew. Naomi kept her job but spent evenings helping him prepare for investor meetings, proofreading contracts, managing the schedules he was too busy to track. She didn't mind. This was what partnership looked like, she thought. You build together. You sacrifice for the shared dream. By the second year, Hunt Dynamics had tripled in size. Justin hired a real office, brought on a full team, started wearing tailored suits that made him look like the success he was becoming. Naomi felt proud. She'd been there since the beginning. She'd helped make this happen. That was also the year they started trying for a baby. Naomi had always wanted children. She'd grown up lonely, bouncing between relatives who did their duty but never quite made her feel like she belonged. She wanted to build the family she'd never had, loud breakfasts, inside jokes, a home where love wasn't a ration but in abundance. Justin said he wanted the same. They picked out names together, laughed about whose eyes the baby would have, started looking at houses with good school districts. But month after month, the tests came back negative. At first, it was disappointing but not alarming. These things take time, the doctor said. Stay relaxed. Keep trying. By the end of year 3, relaxation had curdled into clinical routine. Ovulation kits. Timed intercourse. Appointments that made Naomi feel less like a wife and more like a project with a declining success rate. Justin grew quieter. He stopped asking about the results. Stopped coming to the appointments. Started working later, traveling more, checking his phone during the dinners Naomi still cooked even though they barely spoke through them. She told herself it was stress. The company was expanding into new markets. He was under pressure. She needed to be patient, supportive. That's what wives did. Year 4, Justin hired a new executive assistant named Vanessa Crane. Vanessa was 31, polished in a way that looked effortless but absolutely wasn't. She wore heels that made her 3 inches taller, carried herself like someone who'd never questioned whether she belonged in a room. She was efficient, Justin said. Organized. Exactly what the company needed as they scaled. Naomi met her once at a company holiday party. Vanessa's handshake was firm, her smile was bright, and her eyes moved over Naomi the way people glance at furniture. A quick assessment, then dismissal. Justin talks about you all the time, Vanessa said, though her tone suggested he didn't, or if he did, it wasn't flattering. Naomi felt something cold settle in her chest, but pushed it away. She was being paranoid, insecure. Justin loved her. They were trying to build a family. You don't throw that away for an employee. Except the late nights got later. The business trips got longer. And when Naomi reached for Justin in bed, he turned away more often than not, citing exhaustion, stress, an early meeting. By year 5, Naomi could feel the marriage dying, but didn't know how to resuscitate it. She tried everything. Couples therapy, which Justin attended twice before claiming the timing didn't work. Surprise dinners, which he canceled last minute. Love notes tucked into his briefcase that were never acknowledged. The doctor's appointments continued. More tests. More interventions. And then one afternoon in late April, Naomi sat in an exam room while Dr. Kellerman, a woman she'd come to dread seeing, delivered news in a voice trained for bad outcomes. Your hormone levels are inconsistent, and given the structural concerns we've discussed, carrying a pregnancy to term is unlikely. I don't want to say impossible, but I need you to prepare for the reality that biological children may not be in your future. Unlikely. The word hung in the air like a sentencing. Naomi drove home in silence, her hands shaking on the wheel. She walked into the penthouse apartment, the one Justin's success had bought, the one that never quite felt like hers, and found him waiting in the living room. Not on his phone. Not distracted. Waiting. Present in a way he hadn't been in months. For one stupid, hopeful second, she thought maybe he knew. Maybe he'd somehow sensed she needed him. Then he started talking, and she realized he'd rehearsed this. Naomi, we need to talk about us. About where this is going. I think we both know this hasn't been working for a while. The words came at her in slow motion, each one landing with clinical precision. He'd been unhappy for over a year. They'd grown apart. They wanted different things. The fertility issues had made him realize he needed to rethink his future. He'd filed for divorce. His lawyer would be in touch. Oh, and he was seeing someone. Had been for 8 months. He didn't say Vanessa's name, but Naomi's brain filled in the blank anyway. I hope we can do this amicably, Justin said, like he was closing a business deal that hadn't performed to expectations. Naomi stood there, the doctor's words still echoing. Unlikely, impossible, prepare for reality, and watched her husband of 5 years walk out of the room, as if the life they'd built together was a lease he'd decided not to renew. She didn't cry. Not then. She was too shocked. Too hollow. She packed one suitcase that night and left while Justin was asleep in the guest room. She didn't take much: clothes, photos, a jewelry box her grandmother had given her. The apartment, the furniture, the life they'd built. She left it all behind because fighting for pieces of something already broken felt more humiliating than walking away. Naomi checked into a motel off Interstate 85, the kind with flickering neon and thin walls, and finally let herself fall apart. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known in that moment, was that 3 things were about to happen that would rewrite the entire trajectory of her life. The thing about Naomi that made her dangerous, though no one recognized it as danger back then, was her ability to see potential in people before they saw it in themselves. She didn't just love Justin Hunt. She built him. In those early days, before Hunt Dynamics became the name on industry shortlists, before the office downtown and the executive team, Justin ran his logistics startup from a co-working space that smelled like burned coffee and ambition. He had vision but no structure. Passion but no process. He'd pitch to investors and lose them in the 3rd slide because his financials didn't match his projections, or his timelines contradicted his budgets. Naomi fixed that. She'd come home from her own job and spend hours translating Justin's enthusiastic chaos into something investors could trust. She built templates for his presentations, color-coded his cash flow projections, identified the gaps in his business model that he was too close to see. When he landed his first major contract with a regional distribution company, the pitch deck that sealed it had Naomi's fingerprints on every page, though Justin's name was the only one on the signature line. She never asked for credit. That wasn't who she was. She found satisfaction in his success, believed that his wins were their wins. That's what marriage meant to her. Shared victory. Mutual elevation. Justin's business partner in those early days was a man named Trevor Moss. Steady where Justin was impulsive, detail-oriented where Justin was big picture. Trevor saw what Naomi contributed, even mentioned once that she should be on the payroll, but Justin laughed it off. Naomi's got her own career. She helps because she wants to, not because she needs to. That's what makes it pure. Pure. Like her labor was worth more when it was free. Like compensation would somehow taint the love. Trevor left the company 18 months in. A mutual parting that Justin described as strategic realignment. Years later, Naomi would wonder if Trevor had seen something she'd missed. If he'd recognized the edge of narcissism hidden under Justin's charm and decided to exit before it sharpened. But back then, Naomi only saw a man working himself to exhaustion to build something meaningful. So she worked alongside him, matching his hours, carrying his stress, believing that once the company stabilized, once they achieved the security they were building toward, they'd get back to each other. Back to the couple who used to talk until sunrise, who planned futures in detailed whispers. The baby conversation started during year 2, on a Sunday morning that felt rare and golden because they were both home, both unhurried. Justin brought it up first, talking about how his dad had never been present, how he wanted to do fatherhood differently. Be the kind of father who showed up, who built traditions, who made his kids feel like they mattered. Naomi's heart had cracked open with hope. She'd wanted this for so long. The family she'd never had, the belonging she'd spent her life searching for. They started trying immediately, giddy with the secret, with the possibility. When the first few months brought nothing, they joked about bad timing. When 6 months passed, they stopped joking. When a year went by, Naomi made the first doctor's appointment. The tests started simply. Blood work, cycle tracking. Then they escalated. Ultrasounds, hormone panels, procedures with names Naomi had to Google that left her feeling invaded and clinical. Every appointment was another data point in what was starting to feel less like a medical journey and more like evidence of her inadequacy. Justin attended the first 3 appointments. By the 4th, he had a conflict. By the 6th, he stopped pretending he'd try to make it. "Just text me what they say," he'd tell her, already looking at his phone, already halfway out the door of their conversation. The silence after those appointments was worse than any diagnosis. Naomi would come home with pamphlets about interventions and options, and Justin would nod absently, say something about trying again next month, then retreat to his laptop and the work that actually responded when he put effort in. That's when Vanessa Crane entered the picture. Justin framed the hire as a necessity. Hunt Dynamics was scaling faster than his ability to manage the details. He needed someone senior level, someone who could interface with clients, manage his calendar, keep the operational chaos from swallowing him whole. Vanessa came with an impressive resume, executive experience at a competitor, an MBA from a respected program, connections Justin's company needed as they expanded. The first time Naomi met her was at the company's 4th anniversary celebration, held at a downtown venue Justin had rented to impress potential investors. Naomi wore a dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, deep emerald, the kind of thing she normally wouldn't spend money on, but thought might make Justin look at her the way he used to. He barely noticed. He was too busy working the room, Vanessa at his elbow, introducing him to the right people at the right moments with the precision of someone who'd studied his ambitions and memorized the map. When they finally crossed paths, Vanessa's handshake was professionally firm, her smile calibrated for exactly 2 seconds of warmth. "You must be so proud of everything Justin's built," Vanessa said, her phrasing making it clear that in her accounting, Naomi had observed Justin's success, not contributed to it. "We've worked hard," Naomi replied, though intentional. Vanessa's smile didn't shift, but something in her eyes did. A flicker of assessment. A calculation. Well, he's lucky to have support at home. It frees him up to really focus on what matters. What matters? As if the business was substance and Naomi was simply the backdrop. The comfortable chair he returned to when the important work was done. Justin appeared then, steering Vanessa toward a cluster of investors, his hand briefly touching the small of her back in a gesture that probably meant nothing but felt like everything. Naomi went home early that night, claimed a headache that wasn't entirely a lie. Justin didn't notice her absence. Didn't text to check on her. Didn't come home until after 2 in the morning, smelling like bourbon and expensive cologne that wasn't his usual brand. The late nights became routine after that. Strategy sessions that ran past midnight. Business dinners that Naomi wasn't invited to because they were industry-specific, too boring for her to sit through. Weekend work that couldn't wait until Monday. Naomi told herself she was being paranoid, that the fertility struggles were making her insecure, jealous of the attention Justin gave to anything that wasn't their failing attempts at pregnancy. She doubled down on being supportive, made sure the house was peaceful when he came home stressed. Stopped talking about doctor's appointments because they seemed to make him withdraw further. She was trying to be the wife he needed, not realizing that in his mind, she'd already become the wife he was preparing to leave. The medical news came on a Thursday. Dr. Kellerman delivered it with practiced sympathy, explaining that Naomi's hormone levels and uterine anomalies made carrying a pregnancy to term highly unlikely. Not impossible, but the odds were poor enough that she should consider alternatives. Naomi sat in her car in the medical center parking lot for 40 minutes, unable to drive, unable to cry, unable to do anything but stare at the steering wheel and feel the future she'd imagined disintegrate. She went home and found Justin waiting. For one brief, desperate moment, she thought maybe he'd somehow known she needed him. That the connection they used to have, the one that felt almost telepathic in those early days, had survived. Then he started talking, and she realized the only thing he'd sensed was his own need for an exit. The divorce speech was efficient. He'd clearly outlined his points in advance, maybe even practiced them. They'd grown apart. The spark was gone. He needed to be honest with himself about what he wanted from life. He hoped they could be mature about this. He didn't mention Vanessa. Didn't have to. Naomi could read the truth in the way he wouldn't meet her eyes, in the relief that leaked through his rehearsed regret. "I've already filed," he said. "My lawyer will send over the papers. You can have your own attorney review them. I think you'll find I'm being fair." Fair. Like their marriage was a transaction being dissolved according to market value. Like 5 years of her life, her labor, her love, could be divided down the middle and closed out cleanly. Naomi didn't argue. Didn't scream. Didn't beg. She just nodded, the shock too total for any other response. That night, while Justin slept in the guest room, Naomi packed one suitcase and left. She took her clothes, her grandmother's jewelry box, 3 photo albums, and nothing else. The furniture, the art, the kitchen appliances she'd chosen, she left it all. Walking away from the material things felt easier than fighting for pieces of a life that had never really been hers. The motel off Interstate 85 cost $53 a night and smelled like bleach trying to cover something sadder. Naomi sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, and finally let herself cry. She had no family to call. No close friends. They'd drifted away during the years she'd spent building Justin's dreams instead of maintaining her own connections. No safety net. What she didn't know was that 200 miles away, an attorney named Bernard Lowe was trying to locate her with urgent news about an inheritance that would change everything. And in her body, despite what Dr. Kellerman believed, 2 tiny clusters of cells were dividing, growing, becoming the twins that would give Naomi a reason to stop grieving and start planning. The nausea started on day 4 at the motel. Naomi woke up at 6 in the morning with her stomach churning, barely made it to the bathroom before losing what little she'd managed to eat the night before. She assumed it was stress. Grief had physical symptoms. Her body was processing the implosion of her marriage, the medical news, the sudden freefall from the life she'd known. She spent the morning curled on the bathroom floor, the tile cool against her cheek, wondering how long a person could stay in this kind of limbo before they had to make actual decisions about what came next. Her phone buzzed with texts from a number she didn't recognize. Justin's attorney, she assumed. Divorce papers ready for review. She deleted them without reading. The nausea came back the next morning. And the next. By day 7, a strange thought pushed through the fog of her misery, a thought so impossible she almost laughed. She walked to the drugstore 3 blocks from the motel, bought 2 pregnancy tests with cash, and took them back to her room with shaking hands. She didn't let herself hope. Dr. Kellerman had been clear. Unlikely, bordering on impossible. Her body didn't work the way it was supposed to. This was just her system reacting to trauma. The first test showed 2 lines before she could set it down. The second test confirmed what her brain couldn't process. Naomi sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the plastic sticks, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not joy, not yet. The shock was too total. But underneath the disbelief was a fierce, primal surge of protection. She pressed her hand to her still flat stomach and made a decision without fully articulating it. Whatever this was, whoever this became, she would not let Justin hunt anywhere near it. He'd walked away. He'd filed papers. He'd chosen someone else while Naomi was sitting through appointments trying to fix what he'd decided was her fundamental inadequacy. He didn't get to come back now. Didn't get to claim this. She had no idea yet that it was twins. That would come later, at an appointment with a new doctor in a new city under a new name. But even then, holding those positive tests in a motel room that smelled like industrial cleaner and other people's disappointments, Naomi understood that her life had just split into before and after. Before, when she'd thought her worth was tied to making someone else successful. After, when she'd build something entirely her own. She just had no idea how she'd afford it. The answer arrived 2 days later in the form of Bernard Lowe. Naomi was sitting in the motel's small lobby. Calling it a lobby was generous. It was more of a hallway with a vending machine, trying to force down saltine crackers and ginger ale, when a man in his early 60s walked through the door. He wore a suit that had been expensive a decade ago and now just looked enduring, carried a leather briefcase worn soft at the edges, and scanned the space with the methodical attention of someone who'd found people in worse places. His eyes landed on Naomi, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition, though they'd never met. Ms. Carter? Naomi Carter? Every instinct told her to lie, to say he had the wrong person, to protect whatever small pocket of invisibility she'd found. But exhaustion won over caution. Yes. Relief washed over his face. Thank God. I've been trying to locate you for 2 weeks. I'm Bernard Lowe, attorney for the estate of Miriam Fletcher. May I sit? The name meant nothing to Naomi. She nodded anyway, too tired to be suspicious. Bernard sat across from her, set his briefcase on the scarred table between them, and pulled out a file folder thick with documents. Miriam Fletcher was your great-aunt, your maternal grandmother's older sister. She passed away 5 weeks ago at the age of 87. Naomi searched her memory and came up empty. I've never heard of her. She knew of you. Quite well, actually. Bernard opened the folder, pulled out a photograph, and slid it across the table. The image showed a black woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, standing in front of a house that looked like it cost more than Naomi had earned in her entire life. But it was the other photos beneath it that made Naomi's breath catch. Photocopies of pictures from Naomi's own childhood. Her elementary school graduation. Her college acceptance letter, somehow copied from a newspaper announcement. A wedding announcement she barely remembered submitting to the local paper. How did she? Your great-aunt was removed from the family when she was 18. Pregnant, unmarried, the kind of thing that caused permanent rifts back then. She gave the baby up, moved north, and built a life in commercial real estate. She was exceptionally successful. She also kept track of the family that had exiled her, particularly the women. She never reached out, but she watched. And when she drafted her will, she left very specific instructions. Bernard pulled out another document, this one formal and stamped with official seals. A will. Naomi's name was highlighted in yellow on page 3. The bulk of Miriam's estate, after charitable distributions and specific bequests, goes to you. The total liquid assets amount to just over $200 million. There are also properties, investment accounts, and a few business holdings that will require decisions on your part, but the immediate inheritance is yours upon signing. The number didn't register. It was too large, too absurd. Naomi kept waiting for the punchline, for the catch, for this man to reveal he was actually part of some elaborate scam. There's no mistake? No mistake. Ms. Fletcher was very clear. She included a personal note that I'm instructed to read to you directly. Bernard pulled out a single piece of stationery, expensive paper that probably cost more than Naomi's motel room, and read in a voice that carried the weight of a woman who'd spent 69 years waiting to be heard. To Naomi Carter, the last daughter of a family that taught me women were worth less than the men who failed them. I watched you build a man who didn't deserve you. I watched you shrink yourself to fit inside someone else's vision. I watched you endure and persist and give until you were empty. Now I'm giving you something no one can take, diminish, or tell you you're too soft to handle. Build the life they told you you couldn't. Build it big enough that you never have to beg for permission to exist. And if you're reading this in a low place, know that I started lower. The height you reach is the point. Miriam. Naomi's hands were shaking. She read the note 3 times, the words blurring as tears finally came. Not from grief this time, but from being seen by a stranger who understood exactly what Naomi had survived. What do I need to do? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Bernard walked her through the basics. Signatures. Account transfers. Tax implications that would require a financial advisor. He had recommendations for attorneys, wealth managers, people who specialized in helping sudden inheritors avoid the pitfalls that destroyed lottery winners and trust fund kids. My advice, Bernard said, closing the folder, is to take your time. Don't make sudden decisions. This kind of money can be a burden if you're not careful. But Naomi was already making decisions. Already calculating. The pregnancy meant she had maybe 7 months before everything got complicated. 7 months to disappear from Charlotte, from the life where she was Justin Hunt's discarded wife. 7 months to build a foundation solid enough to support 2 lives, hers and the child's. Children's, though she didn't know that yet. She signed the papers that afternoon in Bernard's office, watching her grandmother's maiden name appear next to dollar amounts that still didn't feel real. The first transfer hit her account within 48 hours. $5 million, just to start, while the rest of the estate cleared probate. Naomi stared at her phone screen, at the balance that had gone from $300 to more money than she could spend in a lifetime, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. She wasn't broken. She was free. The divorce papers arrived from Justin's attorney that same week. She reviewed them in her motel room with a cheap pen and a clarity she hadn't possessed 2 weeks earlier. Justin was offering her $20,000 as a settlement, a laughable amount given that she'd contributed years of unpaid labor to building Hunt Dynamics. The papers cited irreconcilable differences. No mention of Vanessa. No acknowledgement of the real reasons. Naomi could have fought it. With her new resources, she could have hired attorneys who'd tear Justin apart in court, expose the affair, claim her share of the business she'd helped build. But that would mean staying visible, staying connected, giving Justin access to her life, to her choices, to the pregnancy that was making her nauseous every morning and fiercely protective every night. She signed the papers without changes. Took the $20,000. Let Justin think he'd gotten away clean. Let him think she'd accepted his version of events, that she was the weak link, the problem he'd solved by cutting her loose. He had no idea he'd just made the most expensive mistake of his life. Naomi packed her single suitcase, checked out of the motel, and booked a one-way flight to Seattle. Far enough from Charlotte that she wouldn't accidentally run into anyone from her old life, large enough that she could disappear into the professional landscape. At the airport, she stopped at a kiosk and filed paperwork to legally change her last name back to Carter, erasing the last administrative tie to Justin Hunt. On the plane, she opened her laptop and started researching. Not baby names or nursery furniture. She'd get to that eventually. Right now, she needed to understand the game she was about to play. Commercial real estate, distressed debt acquisition, corporate restructuring, the mechanisms of leverage and control. She had 7 months and $200 million. By the time this baby arrived, Naomi would know exactly how to dismantle an empire from the inside. And Justin Hunt, celebrating his freedom and his new relationship, had no idea that the woman he'd discarded was about to become the most dangerous piece on a board he didn't even know he was playing on. Seattle rain became the soundtrack to Naomi's transformation. She rented a furnished apartment in Capitol Hill, nothing flashy, the kind of place a young professional might afford on a decent salary. The instinct to hide her wealth was partly strategic, partly self-protective. She'd watched enough documentaries about lottery winners destroyed by sudden money, about families torn apart by inheritance fights. The best armor was invisibility. The first person she hired was a financial advisor named Ruth Kimura, a woman in her 50s who came recommended by Bernard with a single sentence. She won't let you do anything stupid, and she won't let anyone take advantage of you. Ruth's office was in a downtown high-rise, modest but professional. She took one look at Naomi's situation, pregnant, newly divorced, suddenly wealthy, and didn't ask the questions other people might have. She just pulled out a legal pad and started building a structure. First thing, we set up a trust. Multiple trusts, actually. One for living expenses, one for investments, one that stays locked for your child. Everything compartmentalized, so if anyone ever comes looking, they can't see the full picture. Who would come looking? Ruth gave her a look that said she'd seen this story before. Ex-husbands have a way of developing financial regret once they realize what they walked away from. So they built walls. LLCs nested inside holding companies, investment vehicles with names that revealed nothing. Naomi Carter appeared on paper as a consultant for various entities, drawing a reasonable salary that would explain her lifestyle without attracting attention. The rest, the vast, staggering rest, moved through channels that didn't connect to her name in any searchable way. The second person she hired was Dr. Yolanda Bass, an OBGYN who specialized in high-risk pregnancies and took Naomi on as a patient without asking why she was paying cash. It was Dr. Bass who delivered the news at the 8-week appointment. "I'm seeing 2 distinct heartbeats," she said, adjusting the ultrasound screen so Naomi could see the flickering pulses. "You're carrying twins." Naomi stared at the screen, at the 2 tiny forms that Dr. Kellerman had essentially promised her body couldn't sustain, and felt something fierce and final settle in her chest. Not just survival anymore. Victory. "Given your previous diagnosis, I want to monitor you closely," Dr. Bass continued. But right now, everything looks healthy. Strong. Twins. 2 children who would never know the scarcity Naomi had grown up with. 2 lives she could build from the ground up, without anyone telling them they were too much or not enough. She left the appointment and went directly to the Seattle Public Library, where she'd been spending her afternoons in the business section, systematically educating herself on corporate acquisitions and strategic debt. She wasn't studying randomly. She was studying Hunt Dynamics. Justin's company had exploded in the year before their divorce. The logistics industry was booming, and Hunt Dynamics had positioned itself perfectly to capture mid-market contracts that bigger firms ignored and smaller firms couldn't handle. Justin had always been good at finding the gap in the market. Naomi had been good at building the infrastructure to fill it. But now, reading quarterly reports and industry analyses with fresh eyes and her own resources, Naomi could see the cracks. Hunt Dynamics was growing too fast. They'd taken on contracts in 6 new regions within 18 months, stretching their operational capacity past sustainable limits. They were financing expansion with debt, not unusual, but the terms were aggressive. High interest, short windows, covenants that required maintaining specific revenue targets, or face acceleration clauses that could sink the company overnight. Justin was betting that growth would outpace the risk. That he could keep landing bigger contracts, keep expanding, keep building the empire that made him feel like he'd finally proved his father wrong. Naomi knew Justin well enough to see what others might miss. He was overextended, overconfident, and utterly convinced that the same charm that won clients would somehow bend financial reality in his favor. She started mapping his debt structure. Which banks held which notes? Which contracts had performance bonds tied to them? Where the pressure points were. It wasn't revenge yet. It was archaeology. She was excavating the foundation of something that looked solid, but might not be. While Naomi was building her knowledge base in Seattle, Justin was building his new life in Charlotte. He married Vanessa 4 months after the divorce was finalized. A small ceremony, he told people. Intimate. Just close friends and family. The kind of wedding that suggested sophistication, rather than the rushed replacement it actually was. Vanessa moved into the penthouse that used to be Naomi's, redecorated it in shades of gray and white, erased every trace of the woman who'd come before. She updated her social media to reflect her new status. Mrs. Vanessa Hunt, Executive Vice President of Hunt Dynamics. Power couple. Partnership in business and life. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so calculated. Vanessa was doing exactly what Naomi had done 5 years earlier, building Justin's empire, managing his chaos, filling the operational gaps his big-picture thinking created. Except Vanessa was smart enough to get a title and a salary for her labor. What Vanessa didn't advertise publicly was her role in Naomi's medical diagnosis. It took Naomi 3 months of digging to uncover it, working with a private investigator named Jackie Brennan who specialized in medical fraud. Jackie was ex-FBI, early 40s, with the kind of methodical patience that made her terrifying to people with secrets. "You want to know if your diagnosis was accurate," Jackie had said at their first meeting, no judgment in her voice. "That means you think someone had a reason to lie." "I think someone had a reason to make me believe I couldn't have children." Jackie had nodded slowly. "Who benefits if you believe that?" The answer was obvious, but Naomi needed proof, not suspicion. It took Jackie 6 weeks to find the thread. Dr. Kellerman's practice had a consulting physician who reviewed complex cases, standard procedure. That physician was Dr. Lauren Strick, who happened to be college roommates with Vanessa Crane. The connection alone meant nothing. Medical professionals had personal relationships. But the timeline told a different story. Vanessa had been hired at Hunt Dynamics in March. Dr. Strick had started consulting with Dr. Kellerman's practice in April. Naomi's diagnosis had been revised from difficult but possible to unlikely bordering on impossible. In May, 2 weeks after Vanessa had started traveling alone with Justin to client meetings. Jackie found email records, not the content, but the metadata, showing communication between Vanessa's personal account and Dr. Strick's professional one during the exact window when Naomi's test results were being reviewed. It wasn't smoking gun proof, but it was a pattern. And patterns, when stitched together properly, could become evidence. "You want me to keep digging?" Jackie had asked. "Yes, but quietly. I don't want anyone knowing I'm looking. Because Naomi had learned something in her months of studying corporate warfare. The best attacks are the ones your opponent doesn't see coming. The moment Justin knew she was building something, he'd defend against it. But if she stayed invisible, stayed patient, she could build an entire siege engine before he realized there was a battle. Her pregnancy progressed. The nausea faded by week 14, replaced by energy that felt almost manic. She used it to study, to build relationships with investors and industry analysts who had no idea who she'd been before Seattle. To them, she was just Naomi Carter, a well-funded consultant with sharp questions and a talent for seeing opportunities in distressed assets. She attended industry conferences, sat in the back of panels about logistics and supply chain innovation, listened to Justin speak on a stage in Las Vegas about scaling regional businesses into national players. He looked good, confident, successful. Vanessa sat in the front row, beaming like a woman who'd won. Naomi sat 12 rows back, 7 months pregnant with twins, wearing clothes that hid her condition, and took notes on every vulnerability Justin revealed without realizing it. He mentioned contract targets that seemed aggressive. Mentioned expansion timelines that required everything going perfectly. Mentioned competitors circling, trying to poach his key contracts with lower bids. He was bleeding from a dozen small cuts, and he didn't even know it. After the panel, Naomi walked past him in the hallway. He looked directly at her, his gaze moving past without recognition. She'd changed her hair, lost weight in her face from the early pregnancy, wore glasses she didn't need. But more than that, she'd changed the way she carried herself. The woman who used to make herself smaller to fit Justin's space was gone. He didn't see her because he'd never really looked at her to begin with. That night, Naomi sat in her hotel room and made a list of Hunt Dynamics debt holders. 12 banks, 3 private equity firms, 2 angel investors from the early days who'd rolled their equity into convertible notes. She started making calls. Not as herself. Through the investment entities Ruth had helped her establish. Inquiring about distressed debt portfolios, about whether certain notes might be available for purchase. Feeling out what it would cost to start acquiring the financial hooks embedded in Justin's company. The twins kicked for the first time during one of those calls, a flutter that made her pause mid-sentence. She pressed her hand to her stomach and felt them again. Stronger this time. Insistent. She was building this for them. A world where they'd never have to beg for what they were owed. Where their worth wasn't tied to making someone else feel powerful. By month 8, Naomi had quietly purchased $17 million in Hunt Dynamics debt through 3 separate shell companies. Not enough to control anything. Just enough to have a seat at the table if the company ever stumbled. And Justin, celebrating his first anniversary with Vanessa, posting photos of tropical vacations and business victories, had no idea that his discarded first wife was now one of his creditors. The pressure was building. The threads were connecting. And Naomi, about to become a mother to 2 children her ex-husband didn't know existed, was just getting started. The twins arrived 3 weeks early on a February morning when Seattle was buried under rare snow. Naomi's water broke at 4 a.m. in her apartment. No partner to wake, no family to call. Just her and the hospital bag she'd packed 6 weeks earlier, sitting by the door like a promise she'd made to herself. She drove herself to the hospital, contractions coming hard and regular, both hands on the wheel, breathing through each wave. The emergency room staff looked alarmed when she walked in alone, but Naomi had practiced this moment in her head 100 times. She had Dr. Base's direct line. She had a birth plan. She had everything she needed except the one thing people assumed mattered most, someone to hold her hand through it. She didn't need that. She'd survived worse alone. 14 hours later, Naomi held her daughter against her chest, skin to skin, feeling the tiny heartbeat against her own. 10 minutes after that, her son arrived, smaller but fierce, his cry filling the delivery room with sound that felt like proof of everything Naomi had become. Dr. Base placed him on Naomi's other side, and she looked down at these 2 perfect, impossible humans. The ones she'd been told her broken body couldn't make, and felt something shift so fundamentally that the woman who'd begged Justin Hunt for scraps of affection felt like a stranger. "Do you have names picked out?" a nurse asked, entering vitals into a tablet. "Maya," Naomi said, looking at her daughter. "And Caleb. No middle names yet." She'd decide those later, when she wasn't shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline and the overwhelming reality of being solely responsible for 2 lives. The nurse smiled. Beautiful. And Dad is? Not in the picture. The nurse nodded, made a note, didn't pry. Naomi was grateful for the professionalism, for the absence of judgment or curiosity. She'd built this moment carefully. A private room paid for in cash, no insurance records to flag, no birth announcements to accidentally surface on social media. As far as the world knew, Naomi Carter had disappeared after her divorce. And that's exactly how she wanted it. She spent 3 days in the hospital, learning to nurse twins, learning to function on 20-minute sleep intervals, learning that love could feel like terror and wonder braided so tightly she couldn't tell them apart. On day 4, she took Maya and Caleb home to the apartment she'd already transformed into a fortress of safety. Blackout curtains, white noise machines, a bassinet positioned exactly 18 inches from her bed, so she could reach them without fully waking. She'd studied this the way she studied everything else, systematically, thoroughly, determined to do it right. But nothing prepared her for the weight of 3 a.m. feedings, both babies crying in tandem, her body aching and leaking and foreign. Nothing prepared her for the loneliness that crept in during those dark hours, the wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake trying to do this alone. Then Maya would latch, or Caleb would wrap his tiny fingers around hers, and the doubt would evaporate. This wasn't a mistake. This was the point. While Naomi was learning to be a mother in Seattle, Justin's empire was starting to crack in Charlotte. The first sign came 3 months after the twins were born. Hunt Dynamics lost a major contract to a competitor who'd undercut their bid by 18%. Not unusual in the industry, but problematic given that the contract had been projected as guaranteed revenue in their financial forecasts. Revenue that was tied to debt covenants that required specific performance targets. Justin scrambled. He pushed his sales team harder, started bidding more aggressively on new contracts, cutting margins to win volume. It was a dangerous game. Win the work but make less profit, hoping to make it up in scale. The second crack came when a regional fulfillment center, Hunt Dynamics, had opened in Ohio, turned out to be a money pit. The building had infrastructure problems the inspection had missed. The local labor market was tighter than projected. Operating costs were running 30% over budget, and the contracts serviced out of that location weren't covering the overhead. Justin's CFO, a cautious man named Dennis Pryor who'd been warning about overexpansion for a year, presented options at a board meeting. Close the Ohio facility and eat the loss. Renegotiate terms with their primary lender. Slow growth until margins improved. Justin rejected all of it. Hunt Dynamics was a growth company. Showing weakness now would spook investors, embolden competitors, make them look like they couldn't execute. They'd fix Ohio, land bigger contracts, grow their way out of the tight quarters. Vanessa backed him completely. She presented revised projections that showed Ohio turning profitable within 8 months if they just stayed the course. The numbers looked good on slides. Whether they reflected reality was a different question. Dennis resigned 2 weeks later. The official story was mutual parting, new opportunities. The truth was he'd seen the writing on the wall and wanted his name off the documents before the inevitable happened. His replacement was younger, hungrier, more willing to tell Justin what he wanted to hear. The third crack was the one that made Naomi move. Jackie Brennan called on a Tuesday afternoon while Naomi was attempting to get both twins down for a nap. A logistical challenge that felt harder than anything she'd done in the corporate world. "I found it," Jackie said without preamble. Proof of the medical fraud. Naomi carefully extracted herself from the nursery, closing the door softly, and took the call in her bedroom. "Talk to me. Dr. Lauren Strick altered your test results." Not dramatically, she was smart about it, but she reclassified markers that were borderline as definitive, emphasized anomalies that were within normal variation, and wrote a consulting opinion that effectively told Dr. Kellerman you were a lost cause. "I found communication between Strick and Vanessa Crane discussing your case specifically. Vanessa paid Strick $15,000 2 weeks before your final diagnosis." Naomi sat down on the edge of her bed, staring at the baby monitor where Maya and Caleb were finally settling into sleep. "Can you prove the payment?" "Venmo transfer." Vanessa used her personal account. Strict deposited it the same day. The memo said consulting fee, but the amount and timing connect directly to your medical timeline. Combined with the email metadata and Strick's alterations to your records, it's enough for a medical board investigation at minimum. Possibly criminal fraud charges. Naomi closed her eyes. She'd suspected, but having proof felt different. Heavier. This wasn't just Justin leaving her. This was a coordinated effort to destroy her sense of reality, to make her believe her body was failing when it wasn't, to clear the path for Vanessa to step into the life Naomi had built. "What do you want me to do with this?" Jackie asked. "Nothing yet. Keep the evidence secure. I'll tell you when I need it." Because Naomi had learned patience. Revenge served cold wasn't a cliché, it was strategy. The moment to use this information was coming, but it wasn't now. Now she needed to keep building. She spent the next 6 months in a blur of feedings and conference calls, board meetings conducted via video while twins napped, investment decisions made with spit up on her shoulder. Ruth helped her hire a nanny, a former nurse named Gloria who treated Maya and Caleb like they were made of magic and asked no questions about why Naomi kept her life so private. With Gloria's help, Naomi could focus on the larger plan. She'd been acquiring Hunt Dynamics debt slowly, carefully, through shell companies that looked like routine institutional investors. By the time Maya and Caleb were 7 months old, Naomi controlled $43 million in notes tied to Justin's company. Still not a controlling position, but enough to have influence if things deteriorated. Things were deteriorating. Hunt Dynamics missed a covenant deadline in September. Just barely. They were 2% under their required EBITDA target for the quarter. The banks didn't accelerate the debt immediately, but they sent formal notices. Warning shots. Justin responded by courting a venture capital group called Summit Growth Partners. They specialized in rescuing overextended companies, providing capital infusions in exchange for equity and control. Justin positioned it as a strategic partnership, a way to fuel the next phase of growth. What he didn't know was that Summit's head of acquisitions was a woman named Brianna Moss, Trevor Moss's younger sister. Trevor, Justin's original business partner, the one who'd left early because he'd sensed something off in Justin's character. Trevor and Naomi had never met during his time with Hunt Dynamics, but when Naomi reached out 6 months ago through carefully constructed channels, he'd been happy to talk. Happy to share what he'd seen. Happy to connect her with his sister, who specialized in exactly the kind of situation Justin was stumbling into. Brianna understood the assignment without Naomi having to spell it out. Summit made Justin an offer. $50 million in new capital. Friendly terms, or so it seemed. Enough to cover the Ohio disaster, refinance some of the aggressive debt, give Hunt Dynamics breathing room. The catch was buried in Section 12 of the term sheet, hidden in language about performance triggers and equity conversion. If Hunt Dynamics failed to hit specific targets over the next 18 months, targets that looked achievable on paper but would require everything going perfectly, Summit's preferred shares would convert and control of the company would shift. Not to Summit directly, to Summit's debt holders, the entities that Summit had already agreed to assign the notes to upon conversion. Entities that Naomi controlled. Justin's attorneys reviewed the documents. So did Vanessa, who fancied herself sharp enough to catch traps. They saw a lifeline. They saw salvation. They saw a chance to prove the doubters wrong. They didn't see the trap because they'd never learned to look for the things they'd done to others. Justin signed the Summit deal in October, celebrated with champagne, and a press release about Hunt Dynamics' exciting new phase of growth. Naomi read the press release while nursing Caleb at 2 a.m. and allowed herself a small smile. The board was set. The pieces were moving. And Justin Hunt, who'd once told Naomi she was too soft for the business world, had just handed her the keys to everything he'd built. The performance targets Summit Growth Partners had embedded in their deal were designed to look reasonable. 7% quarterly growth. Maintain existing contract renewals at 92% or higher. Keep operating margins above 12%. On paper, for a company Hunt Dynamics size, these were aggressive but achievable. In reality, they were a time bomb. Justin didn't see it at first. The first quarter after the Summit deal closed, Hunt Dynamics hit their targets. Barely, but enough. He exhaled, told himself the doubters were wrong, posted on LinkedIn about the power of perseverance and strategic partnerships. The second quarter, 2 major contracts came up for renewal. Both were legacy clients, relationships Justin had built personally. He flew to the meetings confident, brought Vanessa to demonstrate executive unity, pitched competitive rates and Hunt Dynamics' proven track record. Both clients went with competitors. Younger, leaner companies willing to work for margins that would barely keep the lights on. Justin lost the renewals in March. By April, Hunt Dynamics had dropped to 87% contract retention, below the covenant threshold. The notice from Summit came via email. Professional, almost sympathetic. They understood market conditions were challenging. They wanted to work with Hunt Dynamics to get back on track. But per the agreement, the missed target triggered certain provisions. They'd need updated financials, a remediation plan, board observer rights to ensure proper oversight. Justin read the email 3 times, looking for the threat beneath the corporate language. Found it in the phrase board observer rights. Summit was coming inside. Watching. Waiting for the next stumble. He called an emergency meeting with his leadership team. 5 people who'd been with him since the early growth days, who'd believed in his vision when Hunt Dynamics was just him and Trevor in a co-working space. "We fixed this," Justin said, standing at the head of the conference table. "We land 3 new contracts this quarter. Big ones. We go after the accounts we've been too cautious to chase. We show Summit and everyone else that Hunt Dynamics doesn't fold under pressure." His COO, a careful woman named Simone Watts, raised a hand. "The contracts you're talking about require infrastructure we don't have. Warehousing capacity, specialized equipment, staff we'd need to hire and train. The capital outlay would put us further behind on margins. Then we lease the equipment, contract the warehousing, stay flexible until we prove we can handle the volume. That's more expensive than owning. It'll destroy our margins. Margins don't matter if we don't have revenue. We need to show growth. Once we're stable, we'll optimize." It was the kind of logic that sounded decisive, but was actually desperation wearing a confident suit. Simone saw it. So did the CFO, the new one, though he was too concerned with keeping his job to push back hard. What Justin didn't know was that the 3 major contracts he was chasing, the ones that seemed like salvation, were accounts that Naomi had quietly identified months earlier. She'd studied the clients, understood their needs, and then positioned Hunt Dynamics to look like the obvious choice while ensuring the execution would be nearly impossible given the company's current infrastructure. It was elegant. Offer them a trap that looked like opportunity, then watch them impale themselves trying to reach it. Justin won 2 of the 3 contracts. Celebrated with his team, took Vanessa to an expensive dinner, felt the familiar rush of proving he could still close deals. The execution was a nightmare from day one. The leased warehousing was in the wrong location, adding transportation costs no one had properly calculated. The contracted staff were undertrained, leading to fulfillment errors that triggered penalty clauses. The specialized equipment broke down twice in the first month, and the lease terms meant Hunt Dynamics ate the repair costs. By July, the 2 new contracts were hemorrhaging money. Revenue was up, technically hitting the growth target, but margins had collapsed to 8%. Another covenant violation. Summit sent another notice. More concern this time. They'd need to install an interim CFO to help stabilize operations. Non-negotiable per the agreement. The interim CFO arrived in August. His name was Marcus Webb, and he was everything Justin wasn't: methodical, data-driven, utterly uninterested in vision speeches or charisma. He spent 2 weeks reviewing Hunt Dynamics financials, then delivered a report to the board that read like an autopsy. The company was insolvent on a cash flow basis. They were borrowing from new contracts to pay obligations from old ones. The Ohio facility was still bleeding money. Payroll was going to be a problem by October if things didn't change dramatically. Marcus recommended immediate action. Close Ohio. Terminate the contracts that weren't profitable. Lay off 30% of staff. Restructure debt. Stop trying to grow and start trying to survive. Justin fought every recommendation. "We're a growth company. We don't shrink our way to success." "You're not growing," Marcus said, his voice flat. "You're dying in slow motion and calling it ambition." The board meeting where this played out lasted 4 hours. Voices were raised. Justin accused Marcus of sabotage, of not understanding the industry, of being installed by Summit to strip the company for parts. Marcus simply kept presenting numbers, unemotional and devastating. The board sided with Marcus. Not unanimously, but enough. They voted to implement the restructuring plan. Justin left the meeting feeling something he hadn't experienced since his father told him he'd never amount to anything, powerless. He went home to the penthouse, the one he'd shared with Naomi, then redecorated with Vanessa, and poured 3 fingers of bourbon he didn't really want. Vanessa found him on the balcony an hour later. "This isn't over. We can fight this. You've come back from worse." But Justin couldn't remember worse. Even in the early days, when money was tight and success felt far away, he'd had momentum. Hope. The belief that he was building toward something. Now he was managing decline. And the board that used to rubber stamp his decisions was listening to a stranger who'd been in the building for 3 weeks. The layoffs happened in September. 32 people, some who'd been with Hunt Dynamics since the beginning. People who'd believed in Justin's vision, who'd worked late and sacrificed and trusted that their loyalty would mean something. Justin delegated the actual terminations to HR. He couldn't face them. Couldn't look at people he'd made promises to and explain that the math no longer worked. Simone Watts was one of the 32. She'd been his COO for 4 years, had warned him about overextending, had tried to build sustainability into the chaos of his ambition. She cleaned out her office without drama, shook Justin's hand, and said something that stayed with him. "You had something real once. Before you started believing your own press releases. I hope you find your way back to that." She didn't sound angry. She sounded sad, which was worse. October brought the next crisis. A lawsuit from one of the contracts Hunt Dynamics had botched. The client was claiming damages for fulfillment failures, seeking $2 million plus legal fees. The case had merit. Hunt Dynamics had missed delivery windows, shipped wrong products, failed to meet basic service standards. The company's insurance would cover some of it, but the deductible and uncovered portions would drain what little cash reserves remained. Justin's attorney recommended settlement. "We'll lose if this goes to trial. The documentation is clear. Settle now, minimize the damage." Justin settled. Wrote a check that hurt. Signed an NDA that meant he couldn't even explain publicly what had happened. By November, Hunt Dynamics had violated 4 separate debt covenants. The banks were no longer sending polite notices. They were sending lawyers. Summit Growth Partners called a special board meeting to discuss strategic alternatives, which everyone in the room understood meant sale or dissolution. Justin sat through that meeting feeling like a ghost at his own funeral. People discussed his company, the thing he'd built from nothing, that had defined his identity for a decade, like it was already past tense. A case study in overexpansion. A cautionary tale. Vanessa tried to be supportive, but her frustration was bleeding through. She'd tied her career to Justin's success. Her title, her salary, her professional reputation, all of it was connected to Hunt Dynamics. If the company failed, she didn't just lose a job. She lost the narrative she'd built about being a power player. "You need to fix this," she told him one night, her voice sharper than he'd ever heard it. "I didn't marry someone who just gives up." The comment landed wrong. Justin heard what she didn't say. "I didn't marry someone who fails." He started wondering what Vanessa would do if Hunt Dynamics collapsed completely. If the money dried up, if the status evaporated. Would she stay with a man who had nothing but debt and a ruined reputation? He didn't ask because he was afraid of the answer. In December, Summit presented their final offer. A controlled sale to an acquisition group they'd identified. Hunt Dynamics would be absorbed into a larger logistics company. Justin would stay on for 6 months as a consultant to ensure smooth transition, then depart with a severance package. It wasn't bankruptcy. It wasn't total failure. But it was the end of Hunt Dynamics as an independent company. The end of Justin's empire. He had 72 hours to decide. He spent those hours in a fog, replaying the last 5 years, trying to identify the exact moment everything had started to unravel. Was it the Ohio facility? The aggressive growth targets? The Summit deal itself? Or was it earlier? The moment he'd looked at Naomi and seen her devotion as a given rather than a gift? The moment he'd let Vanessa's attention flatter him into betrayal? The moment he'd chosen ego over integrity? He signed the acquisition papers on a Friday afternoon, his signature shaking slightly, and felt something inside him break that had nothing to do with business. That night, unable to sleep, he did something he hadn't done in over 2 years. He searched for Naomi online. Her social media accounts were gone. Her LinkedIn hadn't been updated since before the divorce. It was like she'd evaporated. He tried her old email, it bounced back. Tried her old phone number, disconnected. He told himself he didn't know why he was looking. That it didn't matter where she was or what she was doing. But sitting in the penthouse that felt increasingly like a monument to bad decisions, Justin realized he was searching for the last person who'd believed in him before he stopped being worth believing in. He didn't find her. And what Justin Hunt couldn't know, was that the acquisition group Summit had arranged, the one about to take control of everything he'd built, had a very specific majority stakeholder. And she was currently in Seattle, putting twins to bed, reading the signed documents on her phone, and preparing for the final move. The acquisition documents gave Justin 30 days to transition leadership before the new ownership structure took effect. 30 days to brief the incoming team, transfer institutional knowledge, pretend he was handling his obsolescence with grace. He was scheduled to meet the new majority owner on a Monday morning in January, exactly 3 years and 2 months after he'd handed Naomi divorce papers and $20,000 and thought he'd gotten away clean. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. at Hunt Dynamics headquarters, a building Justin had been so proud of when they'd signed the lease, back when growth felt inevitable and failure was something that happened to people who didn't work hard enough. Marcus Webb had organized everything with his characteristic efficiency. The boardroom was prepared. The financial documents were staged. The leadership team would be present for introductions. All very professional. Very civilized. Justin arrived at 9:30, too anxious to be late, too proud to show up obviously early. He paced his office, rehearsing the speech he'd prepared. Dignified. Grateful for the opportunity to ensure a smooth transition. Confident in Hunt Dynamics' foundation and future. All lies, but the kind of lies business required. Vanessa appeared in his doorway at 9:45. She dressed carefully, a sharp suit, heels that added 3 inches, the armor of a woman who needed to look powerful because she no longer felt it. "You ready?" she asked. "Do I have a choice?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. They walked to the boardroom together. The leadership team was already there, the ones who'd survived the layoffs anyway. Marcus Webb sat at one end of the table, reviewing notes on his tablet. 2 attorneys Justin didn't recognize sat opposite each other, presumably representing different parties in the transaction. And at the head of the table, where Justin used to sit, there was an empty chair. "The new owner should be here any minute," Marcus said, glancing at his watch. "She's flying in from Seattle." Justin felt something cold move through his chest. He'd assumed the acquisition group was the typical venture capital crowd. Aggressive men in expensive suits making calculated bets with other people's money. The door opened at exactly 10 a.m. and Naomi Carter walked into the room. For 3 full seconds, Justin's brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. It couldn't be her. Naomi had disappeared. Naomi was. His mind had filed her away in whatever category contained things and people he'd discarded and never thought about again. But it was absolutely her. Different, but unmistakably her. Her hair was styled in a way she'd never worn it when they were married, pulled back in a way that made her look like she belonged in rooms where decisions worth millions were made. She wore a navy suit that fit like it had been made for her body specifically. No jewelry except a simple watch that probably cost more than Justin's car. And her eyes. The warmth that used to live there, the softness he'd mistaken for weakness, it was gone. What replaced it was something harder. Clearer. The look of someone who'd learned exactly how much they were worth. Naomi's gaze moved across the room, landing on each person for a precise moment of assessment, before settling on Justin. No shock. No anger. Just cool recognition. "Mr. Hunt," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from knowing you own everything in the room, including the man standing frozen in front of you. "Thank you for making time for this transition meeting." Justin couldn't speak. His mouth had gone dry. His brain was still trying to reconcile the woman he'd left in a penthouse with tears on her face with the woman currently walking to the head of his boardroom table like she'd been born to sit there. Vanessa recovered first, though her voice came out tighter than usual. "I'm sorry, I think there's been some confusion. We were expecting representatives from the acquisition group." "I am the acquisition group," Naomi said, setting a leather portfolio on the table. "Summit Growth Partners facilitated the transaction, but the controlling interest in Hunt Dynamics now belongs to a network of holding companies that I own. As of this morning, I hold 63% of this company's equity." She said it the way someone might comment on the weather. Factual, unemotional, devastating in its simplicity. Justin finally found his voice. "That's not possible." Naomi looked at him with something that might have been pity if it had been warmer. "I've been acquiring your debt for 3 years, Justin. Every time you borrowed to cover a gap, every time you refinanced to buy time, you were selling pieces of this company to entities I controlled. The Summit deal was just the final consolidation. You signed the terms yourself." She opened the portfolio, pulled out a document, and slid it across the table. Justin recognized his own signature at the bottom. Recognized the day he'd thought he was saving his company. "Section 12, subsection 4, Naomi continued. "The equity conversion clause that triggered when you violated the performance covenants. Which you did. Repeatedly. Your attorneys reviewed this. So did Vanessa, if I recall correctly. You agreed to every term." Vanessa's face had gone pale. She was flipping through her own copy of the documents, searching for the trap they'd missed, the impossible clause that had handed everything to a woman they'd both tried to erase. Marcus Webb cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter has provided all the necessary documentation. The ownership transfer is legally sound. I've verified it personally." Justin's knees felt weak. He sat down heavily in the nearest chair, his mind racing through the implications. Naomi owned Hunt Dynamics, the company he'd built, the empire that was supposed to prove he was more than his father's disappointment. And she'd taken it using the exact same skills he'd once relied on her to provide for free. Why? The question came out hoarse. Why go through all this? If you wanted revenge, you could have just what? Naomi's voice didn't rise, but something in it cut. Screamed at you? Made a scene? Told everyone you left your wife for your assistant while she was struggling with fertility issues you helped convince her were her fault. The room went very quiet. Vanessa's hand moved to her throat, a tell that Justin had learned meant she was panicking. Naomi continued, her voice steady. I didn't do this for revenge, Justin. I did this because you handed me an opportunity to build something ethical on the foundation of your arrogance. And because I have 2 children who deserve to inherit a world where people face consequences for their choices. 2 children. The words hung in the air like a detonation. You're lying, Justin said, but even he could hear the desperation in it. The doctor said what Dr. Lauren Strick told her to say after your wife paid her $15,000 to falsify my results. Naomi pulled another folder from her portfolio, this one thicker. I have the financial records, the communications, the original test results before they were altered. Would you like to review them, Vanessa? Or should I have my attorney send them directly to the medical licensing board? Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You can't prove. I can prove all of it. The question is whether I need to. Whether you want this to be a public scandal or a private accountability. The attorneys were typing rapidly on their laptops. The leadership team sat frozen, watching their world realign in real time. Justin felt like he was drowning. You have children. My children. I have children, Naomi corrected. Whether you have any claim to them is something we'll discuss later. Right now, we're here to talk about this company. She opened another document, this one showing financial projections and restructuring plans. Hunt Dynamics is salvageable, but not as it currently operates. The business model is sound. The execution has been reckless. I'm implementing immediate changes. Some of you will remain in your positions. Others will be transitioned out. Mr. Hunt, your consultant contract includes a 6-month term with specific deliverables. If you fulfill them professionally, you'll receive your severance as outlined. If you don't, the terms allow for immediate termination without compensation. She said it all like she was reading a grocery list. No triumph. No gloating. Just the mechanical execution of a plan she'd spent years building. Justin stared at her, trying to find the woman he'd married in this stranger's face. When did you become this? When you forced me to choose between staying broken or building something new. You made that choice very easy. The meeting continued for another 90 minutes. Naomi walked through her plans for Hunt Dynamics: ethical contracts, sustainable growth, restored relationships with vendors Justin had burned. She was methodical, thorough, and absolutely in command. Justin sat through it feeling like he was watching his own life from outside his body. Every decision Naomi made was the right one. Every change she proposed would fix problems he'd created. And she delivered it all without once raising her voice or acknowledging the personal devastation underneath the business transaction. When the meeting finally ended, people filed out quietly. Vanessa left without looking at Justin, her phone already pressed to her ear, presumably calling her own attorney. Justin stayed in his chair, staring at the table where he'd once felt powerful. Naomi packed her portfolio, preparing to leave. Justin found himself speaking before he could think better of it. Can I meet them? The children? Naomi paused, her hand on the portfolio. For the first time since she'd walked in, something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, but maybe the memory of it. That's not a conversation we're having today. Today was about business. What comes next, if anything comes next, depends entirely on choices you haven't made yet. What choices? Whether you're capable of being honest. Whether you can face what you did without blaming circumstances or rewriting history. Whether you can be the kind of person who deserves to be in their lives. She looked at him fully then, and Justin saw something in her eyes that hurt more than anger would have. Disappointment. You threw away someone who loved you because you confused devotion with weakness. Now you have to decide what kind of man you actually want to be. Not who you pretend to be in LinkedIn posts. Who you are when no one's watching. She walked toward the door, then paused. I'll be at the Charlotte offices for the next 2 weeks overseeing the transition. We'll have another meeting Friday to review your progress on the deliverables. Don't be late. Then she was gone, leaving Justin alone in a boardroom that no longer belonged to him, in a company that bore his name but was now entirely hers. And for the first time in years, Justin Hunt was forced to look at himself without the distortion of success to hide behind. What he saw was exactly what Naomi had become strong enough to walk away from. The question was whether he was capable of becoming something worth walking back to. The 2 weeks Naomi spent in Charlotte were surgical. She arrived each morning at 7 a.m., before most of the staff, and stayed until she'd accomplished exactly what she'd planned for that day. No wasted motion. No unnecessary conversation. She reviewed contracts, met with vendors Justin had alienated, rebuilt relationships he'd burned in his desperation to maintain appearances. The employees who'd survived the layoffs watched her with a mixture of wariness and cautious hope. This new owner wasn't flashy or loud. She didn't give speeches about vision and disruption. She just fixed things methodically, one broken piece at a time. By the end of week 1, she'd renegotiated 3 vendor contracts on better terms, identified 2 clients willing to return if service standards improved, and uncovered accounting irregularities that explained why Hunt Dynamics had been bleeding money faster than the revenue gaps suggested. The irregularities traced back to Vanessa. Nothing dramatic, just small redirects. Consulting fees paid to an LLC Vanessa controlled. Expense reimbursements that didn't quite match receipts. Over 3 years, it added up to nearly $200,000 that had flowed out of Hunt Dynamics and into accounts Vanessa had carefully hidden. Marcus Webb brought Naomi the findings on Thursday afternoon, his expression grim. This is prosecutable. Embezzlement fraud. You could have her arrested. Naomi reviewed the documents carefully. Part of her, the part that still remembered sitting in Dr. Kellerman's office feeling broken, wanted exactly that. Wanted Vanessa let out in handcuffs, wanted the public humiliation, wanted everyone to see what kind of person hides behind expensive suits and confident smiles. But that wasn't who Naomi had become. She'd learned that the sharpest revenge wasn't spectacle. It was inevitability. Set up a meeting, Naomi said. Vanessa, Justin, our attorneys, and me. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. What are you planning? Offering choices. What people do with them tells you everything you need to know. The meeting was scheduled in the same boardroom where Naomi had revealed herself 10 days earlier. Vanessa arrived first, her lawyer in tow, a sharp-eyed woman named Kim Russo who clearly specialized in making problems disappear. Justin came in 5 minutes later, looking like he hadn't slept. He probably hadn't. Naomi had assigned him specific deliverables: documentation on client relationships, operational procedures, institutional knowledge that would help the transition. He'd been working late every night trying to prove he could still be valuable. Naomi walked in exactly at 9, Ruth Kimura beside her, and set 2 folders on the table. "Thank you both for coming," Naomi began, her tone professional. "We have several matters to resolve this morning. The first concerns financial irregularities discovered during our operational audit." She slid the first folder to Vanessa. "Over the past 3 years, approximately $197,000 has been diverted from Hunt Dynamics to entities you control. The documentation is thorough. Bank records, invoice discrepancies, expense reports that don't match actual expenditures." Vanessa's lawyer immediately went into damage control mode. "My client disputes these allegations. If there are accounting errors, they're unintentional." "They're not errors," Ruth interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent 30 years making sure numbers told the truth. "They're systematic theft. We have 3 years of evidence." Ms. Crane was careful, but not careful enough. Vanessa's face had gone rigid. "You can't prove intent." "I don't need to prove intent in criminal court if you cooperate with what comes next," Naomi said. "The second matter is the medical fraud." She opened the second folder, thicker than the first. "In May, 3 years ago, you paid Dr. Lauren Strick $15,000 to alter my fertility test results. To make me believe my body was incapable of carrying a child when it wasn't. Dr. Strick consulted on my case, reclassified borderline results as definitive, and wrote an opinion that effectively ended my hope of having biological children." Justin's head snapped up. "What?" Naomi kept her eyes on Vanessa. "The payment was made from your personal Venmo account to Dr. Strick's personal account. The memo said consulting fee. 2 weeks later, my doctor delivered the diagnosis that my condition was unlikely to ever result in a successful pregnancy. 1 month after that, Justin asked me for a divorce." She slid documents across the table. Communications between Vanessa and Dr. Strick. Financial records. The original test results before Strick's alterations. The revised results after. "You destroyed my medical records to clear a path for yourself," Naomi continued, her voice level despite the fury underneath. "You made me believe I was broken, that my body was failing. And you did it so you could take my place without the complication of me fighting for a marriage that was producing children." Justin was staring at Vanessa like he'd never seen her before. "Tell me this isn't true." Vanessa's lawyer put a hand on her arm, warning her not to speak. But Vanessa was too angry to stay silent. "You were already leaving her," she snapped at Justin. "You were miserable. The fertility issues were just the excuse you needed to finally admit the marriage was over. I didn't create that. I just what?" Justin's voice cracked. "Just paid someone to lie about medical results? Just convinced my wife she was defective so I'd feel justified leaving. She was never going to let you go. She would have kept trying, kept hoping, kept dragging you both through failure after failure. I ended it cleanly." The room went silent. Even Vanessa's lawyer looked uncomfortable. Naomi felt something settle in her chest. Not satisfaction, exactly. Just the quiet confirmation that she'd been right about who these people were. "Here are your options," Naomi said, looking at Vanessa. "Option 1. I report the embezzlement and the medical fraud to the appropriate authorities. You face criminal charges, lose your medical insurance license, and likely serve time. It becomes public record. Everything you've built disappears." Vanessa's hands were shaking. "Option 2. You resign from Hunt Dynamics immediately. You repay the full amount you embezzled plus 20%. You surrender your professional licenses voluntarily and sign an agreement never to work in healthcare consulting or corporate finance again. You issue a written confession regarding the medical fraud, which I will hold but not release publicly unless you violate these terms. And you stay away from me and my children permanently." "Your children," Vanessa said, her voice bitter. "You want us to believe you actually got pregnant after that diagnosis?" Naomi pulled out her phone, opened her photo gallery, and turned the screen toward the table. The image showed two 3-year-old children asleep in a double stroller. Maya with her hair in puffs, Caleb with his hand curled against his sister's arm. Both of them beautiful, healthy, impossible according to the lies Vanessa had paid to tell. Justin made a sound like he'd been punched. Twins, Naomi said quietly. Born healthy 7 months after Justin filed for divorce. The pregnancy your paid expert said my body couldn't sustain. Justin reached for the phone, his hand trembling. Naomi let him take it, watched him stare at the faces of children who had his eyes, his nose, his expressions in miniature. I have kids, he whispered. You have DNA, Naomi corrected. Whether you have children depends on whether you're capable of being a father. That's a question we'll address later. Right now, we're resolving business. She turned back to Vanessa. You have until end of business today to decide. Option 1 or option 2. Choose wisely. Vanessa's lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently. Vanessa's face cycled through emotions, rage, fear, calculation. Finally, she nodded. Option 2. Good. Ruth will send over the documents within the hour. You'll sign them by 5 p.m., and you'll be removed from company records by Monday. Naomi stood, gathering her folders. Your access to this building is revoked as of now. Security will escort you out. She'd arranged that in advance. 2 security officers appeared in the doorway as if summoned. Vanessa stood on shaking legs, her lawyer gathering papers frantically. As she reached the door, she turned back. You think you've won. But everyone's going to know you bought this company just to humiliate your ex-husband. They'll see exactly what this is. Naomi met her eyes without flinching. What they'll see is a woman who turned betrayal into opportunity, who built something ethical from something corrupt, who protected her children from people who would have used them as leverage. If that looks like winning to you, then yes, I won. Vanessa left without another word. Justin remained in his seat, still staring at Naomi's phone, at the picture of Maya and Caleb. I'm their father, he said again, like he was trying to make it real by repeating it. Biologically, yes. In every other way that matters, you abandoned them before they existed. I didn't know. You didn't ask. You didn't stay. You didn't do the work of being present even when things were hard. You chose the easier path, and that path didn't include being a parent. Justin set the phone down gently, like it was something precious he'd already broken. What do I have to do? To be part of their lives. Naomi sat back down, studying him. This was the moment she'd planned for, rehearsed in her mind during countless 3 a.m. feedings, during the lonely early days when she'd been terrified she couldn't do it alone. First, you face what you did. Not just to me. To everyone. The employees you laid off because you were too proud to admit you'd overextended. The vendors you strong-armed when you had leverage and discarded when you didn't. The people who believed in you and got nothing back but broken promises. You account for all of it. How? That's your work to figure out. I'm not your conscience or your guide. I'm the person you underestimated and the parent your children deserve to have protecting them. She stood again, final this time. You have deliverables due tomorrow. Focus on those. Prove you can keep commitments when they're not convenient. Then maybe we talk about whether you're ready to meet Maya and Caleb. Can you at least tell me about them? Naomi paused at the door. Some small part of her, the part that remembered loving this man, that remembered believing they'd build a family together, softened slightly. Maya is fierce. She doesn't back down from anything, even when she should. Caleb is gentle, but he notices everything. He sees people's hearts before their words. They're bright and funny, and they've never known a day when they weren't loved completely. She looked at Justin fully. They're everything you and I could have had if you'd been brave enough to stay. Then she left him alone with the weight of everything he'd thrown away. The documents Vanessa signed that afternoon were legally binding and personally devastating. She resigned from Hunt Dynamics, agreed to repayment terms that would take years, and surrendered the professional credentials she'd spent a decade building. The confession regarding the medical fraud was notarized and placed in a secure file that would remain private as long as Vanessa honored the agreement. It wasn't prison. It wasn't public destruction. But it was accountability, which for people like Vanessa was often worse. By the end of Naomi's second week in Charlotte, Hunt Dynamics was operating under new leadership, new ethics, and a new mission. Naomi promoted 2 internal candidates to senior roles, brought back 3 employees who'd been laid off unjustly, and instituted transparent financial practices that made fraud nearly impossible. She also quietly established a fund to compensate vendors Justin had shortchanged and employees who'd lost severance during the financial crisis. None of it made headlines. Naomi didn't issue press releases about her takeover or the circumstances that led to it. She simply rebuilt what had been broken and let the results speak. But in Charlotte's business community, word traveled. The story of how Justin Hunt's first wife had returned to save his company and expose the corruption in his second marriage became the kind of thing people whispered about at networking events. Not with judgment toward Naomi. With respect. She'd played the game better than anyone realized it was being played, and she'd won without sacrificing her integrity. The question now was what came next. Whether Justin could become someone worthy of his children's time. Whether Naomi could let herself trust that the man who destroyed her could transform into someone safe. And whether Maya and Caleb, growing up loved and secure in Seattle, would ever need to know how close they came to not existing at all. 6 months after Naomi walked into that boardroom and reclaimed everything Justin had taken for granted, Hunt Dynamics was unrecognizable. The company still bore Justin's name, but everything else had changed. Revenue was down initially. Naomi had walked away from contracts that required cutting corners or exploiting workers. But margins were healthy for the first time in years. Employee retention was up. Vendor relationships were rebuilt on mutual respect rather than leveraged desperation. The trade publications noticed. Articles started appearing about Hunt Dynamics' ethical turnaround, about the mysterious new owner who'd restructured the company around sustainability rather than extraction. Naomi declined all interview requests. She didn't need the publicity. The results were enough. Justin completed his 6-month consultancy contract. Not perfectly. There were days he showed up late, days his deliverables were rushed, but he finished. Proved he could follow through on something even when it hurt his ego. On his last official day, Naomi scheduled a final meeting. Just the 2 of them, in her temporary office at Hunt Dynamics Charlotte headquarters. He arrived on time, carrying a folder of closing documents and a resignation that showed in the slope of his shoulders. "Everything's in order," he said, setting the folder on her desk. "Transition notes, client relationship histories, operational recommendations. It's all there." Naomi reviewed the documents briefly. Thorough. Honest. The kind of work she'd hoped he was still capable of. "Thank you. Your severance will be processed by Friday." Justin nodded, started to leave, then stopped. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask. Why did you keep the company name? You could have rebranded. Erase me completely." Naomi considered the question. Because Hunt Dynamics was never just you. It was also the work of people who believed in something better. Trevor, before you pushed him out. Simone, before you fired her. Me, before you discarded me. Changing the name would erase all of us. I kept it as a reminder that institutions can survive their worst leadership if someone cares enough to do the repair work. Justin absorbed that, the truth of it clearly landing. "I've been going to therapy. 3 times a week. Trying to figure out how I became someone who could do what I did." "That's good. That's necessary. My therapist says I was replicating my father's patterns. Treating people like they were only valuable when they were useful. Discarding them when they required actual emotional work." He laughed bitter. "I spent my whole life trying not to be him, and I became exactly him. Self-awareness is a start. What you do with it is what matters. I want to meet them. Maya and Caleb. I know I don't deserve to, but I'm asking anyway." Naomi had known this request was coming. Had thought about it during every feeding, every bedtime story, every moment when her children asked questions about where they came from. She'd consulted child psychologists, read research on parental involvement, talked it through with Ruth and Gloria and the small circle of people she trusted. The consensus was that children deserved the opportunity to know their biological father, if he was safe and stable and genuinely committed. The question was whether Justin was any of those things yet. "I'm moving back to Charlotte," Naomi said. "Permanently. Hunt Dynamics needs consistent leadership, and Maya and Caleb deserve stability. I've bought a house in Davidson. Good schools, quiet neighborhood. We're settling in next month." Justin's expression shifted. Hope carefully controlled. If you want to be part of their lives, it happens slowly. Supervised visits at first. Consistency over months, not weeks. You prove you can show up when it's inconvenient. When they're sick or cranky or boring. You prove that you're not going to disappear the moment fatherhood gets hard. I'll do whatever it takes. I've heard you make promises before, Justin. I don't trust words anymore. Only patterns. Then let me build a pattern. Please. Naomi studied him. He looked different than he had 6 months ago. Thinner, older, humbled by losses that couldn't be fixed with charm or money. Whether that translated to genuine change or just temporary damage control remained to be seen. We start in August. 1 supervised visit per week, 1 hour, at a neutral location. You don't tell them you're their father. You're just Justin, someone who knows their mom. If you're consistent for 3 months, we reassess. Thank you. His voice cracked slightly. I know I don't deserve this chance. You don't. But they deserve the opportunity to decide for themselves what kind of relationship they want with you. That's not about what you deserve. It's about what's best for them. Justin left that meeting with something he hadn't felt in years. Accountability that came with hope attached. The first visit happened on a Saturday in August at a park equidistant from Naomi's new house and Justin's downsized apartment. Gloria came as the supervisor, her nurse's training and general lack of tolerance for nonsense making her ideal for the role. Maya and Caleb were curious but cautious, the way 3-year-olds are with new adults. Justin had brought a soccer ball, which turned out to be exactly right. Caleb was initially shy, but Maya demanded he teach her to kick, and within 20 minutes both kids were laughing and chasing the ball while Justin called out encouragement. Naomi watched from a bench 30 yards away, her chest tight with complicated emotions. That could have been their life. Weekend mornings at the park, shared joy, a family built on presence instead of regret. But it wasn't, and she'd made peace with that. After an hour, Gloria called time. Justin knelt to say goodbye, and Maya hugged him without hesitation. Caleb offered a high five, which Justin accepted like it was a treasure. Can he come back? Maya asked Naomi as they walked to the car. If he wants to. We'll see. Justin came back the next week. And the week after that. And every week for the next 3 months, never missing, never late, building the kind of reliability that couldn't be faked. By November, Naomi allowed unsupervised visits. By February, she told the twins the truth about who Justin was. They processed it the way children do, with questions, adjustment, and ultimately acceptance. Justin would never be the father he could have been if he'd stayed. But he was becoming a father who showed up, who tried, who let his children see him fail and apologize and try again. It wasn't redemption, but it was responsibility, which was more than Naomi had expected. Hunt Dynamics continued to grow under Naomi's leadership. She brought Trevor Moss back as COO, correcting the loss Justin had created years earlier. She promoted from within, invested in training, built the kind of company culture where people stayed because they wanted to, not because they had to. By the company's 15th anniversary, Hunt Dynamics had tripled its ethical contract portfolio, become a case study in successful corporate restructuring, and established an employee-owned equity program that shared profits with the people who generated them. Naomi gave a speech at the anniversary celebration, standing in front of employees who'd survived the hard years and new hires who only knew the stable version of the company. Hunt Dynamics exists because people believed in building something sustainable, she said. Not everyone who started this journey stayed true to that vision. But the vision survived anyway. That's what I want you to remember. Institutions are only as ethical as the people leading them. And all of you, every day, choose to lead with integrity. That's worth celebrating. The applause was genuine. So was the community she'd built. Vanessa disappeared from Charlotte entirely. Rumors placed her in Phoenix, working retail, her professional credentials gone, her reputation unsalvageable. Naomi didn't follow up. Didn't need to. Vanessa's consequences were her own to carry. Dr. Lauren Strick lost her medical license after a board investigation triggered by an anonymous complaint. The investigation uncovered a pattern of ethical violations beyond just Naomi's case. Justice, when it finally arrived, was thorough. On a Sunday evening 3 years after she'd walked into that boardroom, Naomi sat in her backyard in Davidson watching Maya and Caleb play with the dog they'd adopted 2 months earlier. The house was full of the kind of chaos that came with children. Toys scattered, laughter loud, life abundant. Ruth stopped by with quarterly financial reports, though they both knew it was really an excuse to have dinner and watch the kids. "You've built something remarkable," Ruth said, sipping wine while Caleb tried to teach the dog to fetch. "The company, the family, all of it. I built what I needed to survive. It just turned out that survival looked like thriving." "Any regrets?" Naomi thought about it honestly. "I regret the time I wasted believing I had to shrink to be loved. I regret not seeing Justin clearly earlier. But I don't regret the journey. The hard parts made me someone I'm proud to be. The twins are lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have them. They're the reason I didn't let bitterness win." Maya ran over, breathless. "Mom, can we have a fire? And make us mores? It's almost bedtime. Please, just a little fire." Naomi looked at her daughter's hopeful face and made the calculation every parent makes: sleep schedule versus joy. Little fire. Quick as mores. Then bed. Maya cheered and ran to tell Caleb, who immediately started gathering sticks with the seriousness of someone on an important mission. Ruth smiled. "You're good at this. The balance. I'm learning. Every day." As the sun set and the fire crackled and her children debated the proper marshmallow to chocolate ratio, Naomi felt something she hadn't felt in the early years of her marriage. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was hers, built on choices she'd made, sustained by strength she'd earned. Her phone buzzed. A text from Justin. *, thank you for letting me be part of their lives. I know I still have work to do to earn it. *. She didn't respond immediately. Let him sit with the uncertainty, the same way she'd sat with it for years. But eventually she typed back. * keep showing up. That's all that matters. *. Because that was the truth she'd learned the hard way. Love wasn't grand gestures or promises. It was presence. Consistency. The choice to stay even when it was hard. Naomi had built an empire from heartbreak, turned betrayal into blueprint, transformed herself from someone who begged for belonging into someone who created it on her own terms. And on this particular Sunday evening, watching her children chase fireflies while the smell of wood smoke and burnt sugar filled the air, she knew with absolute certainty that she'd won. Not because she destroyed the man who hurt her, but because she'd built a life so full and so true that his absence had stopped mattering. That was the kind of victory that lasted. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated, discarded, or told you weren't enough, know that your story doesn't end where someone else decided to stop valuing you. Sometimes the people who leave are doing you a favor they don't understand. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to the best version of yourself. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts on Naomi's journey. Hit that subscribe button for more stories about people who refuse to stay broken. And remember, the life they told you couldn't have? Build it anyway. Build it bigger than they could imagine. Build it so well that when they finally see what you became, all they can do is recognize everything they lost. Your transformation is the best response you'll ever give.